For a long time, Need for Speed has been operating in a very bad way. They have been using the same formula for almost 30 years. Need for Speed can't compete against other racing games anymore because all these other racing games have bigger budgets and more content. And the old Need for Speed formula is just not working anymore. And the sad truth is, it really hasn't been working for a very long time now. Need for Speed has been operating in the same way since Need for Speed Underground 1. Need for Speed has lost so much steam because the franchise isn't getting the attention it needs. If you really want to save Need for Speed, then it needs to get the same attention as Battlefield 6, of where everyone is working on it. There are a lot of factors to why Need for Speed is dead, and one thing we need to do is really come to terms with that statement and face the facts that Need for Speed is dead. This is why the franchise has been put on hold, and we have no idea if they will ever bring it back. And so far it looks like there is no plans or talks of bringing it back. From what I have seen, one major problem is the budgets that are used to make the games. There isn't a lot of information about the NFS budgets, but a rumor is that it's about 50 million for some of these modern NFS games. We can most likely assume that the budgets are below 100 million, which quite frankly is just not big enough, and this is why the games have been flopping. And then you take games like Forza and Gran Turismo into consideration, of where these games have anywhere from 200 million to 400 million dollar budgets, because making racing games with licensed cars is not cheap. As I said before, Need for Speed has been using the same model for way too long, and now that same model is very dated and flawed. If you take into consideration Need for Speed's competition, they are doing way more with their games. NFS has been giving us nothing compared to their competition, and to be specific about the competition, I'm talking about games like Forza Horizon 5, Forza Motorsport, Gran Turismo 7, The Crew 2 and The Crew Motorfest. These are some of Need for Speed's biggest rivals right now, and I know people would argue that Forza and Gran Turismo are both racing simulators, but all of these games have one thing in common, and that is cars. They are all racing games. The handling doesn't matter. They all function the same, of where you are racing other people and you must cross the finishing line first. For a long time, Need for Speed has suffered from a very low car list count. Yeah, sure, the early NFS games like Underground 1 and 2 didn't need a lot of cars because it was alright for the standard back then, but they haven't showed a lot of improvement from back then. The early NFS games like the Underground games and Most Wanted 2005 had less than 40 cars, and fast forward to NFS Payback, of where the game had less than 100 cars, and even up to Unbound, the games have never had a car list of more than 200 cars, and when you compare it to all their rival games, you would see that they have way more cars than even the most recent NFS games. For example, Forza Horizon 5 has 900 cars, and that is a list that is probably still growing, and Forza Motorsport has over 500 cars, and that is a list that is most likely still growing too, because most of the latest Forza games are very heavy live service games, so I'm sure that they are constantly receiving new updates to the game. And Gran Turismo 7 has 551 cars, but that is also a list that is probably still growing, because GT7 is also a live service game that receives quite a few updates. The Crew 2 has apparently over 600 cars, but I know that it's a fairly aged game that has received quite a few big updates, but I don't think it's a car list that will be growing any bigger because of the game's age. And the Crew Motorfest apparently has over 600 cars in it, and that is most likely a list that is still growing since it is the latest Crew game. And you can imagine, all the games I just mentioned have licensed cars. That is wild considering the cost of how much it costs to license a car in a video game. It's kind of interesting that NFS has had so few cars, because the truth is, you only ever had like maybe 5 or 10 cars, unless you got all the rivals' cars. But back in the day, it felt like so many because people had such a good relationship with the cars that they had built. They could pretty much fully personalize and customize their cars to the way they wanted. Going from 0 to 100 with a car really helps build a bond, especially when you started out with a very slow car and now you upgraded it to something much faster. A lot of people have stated that the reason NFS has so few cars and customization options is because of licensing costs, and from what I heard, they pretty much have to pay a license for anything that is branded in the games. And the sad part is that NFS lost Toyota, which has pretty much always been a staple in the Need for Speed games. It's sad that NFS lost Toyota because the games were never the same without Toyota. And the other thing is, they also have to pay a license for any car customizations. So for any body kits and rims like your Rocket Bunny and BBS, they have to pay a license for that. And it's the same case with cars, which is most likely where a good chunk of their budget goes to. It's very clear of the issues that have plagued Need for Speed for years, and it's weird that a new modern NFS game costs the same as its rivals. How is it that NFS Unbound can cost as much as Forza Horizon 5, yet it only gives you a fraction of the stuff? For a long time, NFS operated on a 30 car list on the standard version, and then maybe they will add about 10 to 20 cars with the DLC. It doesn't get better with the actual content of the games. Modern NFS games usually have about 20 hours of content if you are lucky, and the rest is just collectibles. The question I have is, why should we pay full price for such a lackluster game when all their rivals offer way more? DLC is also a big problem with Need for Speed. You find that most of the DLC and updates is usually just more cars and more cosmetics, which doesn't always give the game a new or better experience. One other thing that has been missing from Need for Speed games is map expansions. It seems that Need for Speed doesn't have a very big history of map expansions. It just seems that they have always had this very take it or leave it approach for their games, of where they only do one thing and then they just add more cars and cosmetic items. This also leads to a lack in sales and hype for the game, because people know the roadmap of the games now. After everything I have seen, I can tell this is an EA problem and not a Need for Speed problem. EA is widely known to mismanage just about everything. The same EA that even lost their license to make FIFA games. The same EA that shut down Black Box. The same EA that ruined Battlefield. The same EA that ruined Dead Space. The list goes on and on about EA and their mistakes. One also has to think about how much it would cost to actually make a good racing game, because if they have been making Need for Speed games with a below $100 million budget, outside of paying for licensing, the budget also needs to go into the development of the game and the amount of money needed to pay employees and stuff like that. With a below $100 million budget, I can't imagine that they can afford to do much, because you have to take into consideration how much it costs to license a car and how much it costs to license anything for that matter. It makes me think that they only have about 15 to 20% of the budget left to choose the car list, car customizations, as well as the voice actors and so on. The only way to save Need for Speed is for EA to give the same amount of attention as Battlefield 6. If EA wants to bring back NFS, then it needs to be a priority. They need to put in more money, get better writers and a better team to make the game. The NFS games don't seem to be made by passionate people anymore, and you can feel it when you play the modern NFS games. They are flat and uninspired. EA is never willing to take risks with Need for Speed anymore. It's very interesting how both Sony and Ubisoft are willing to spend almost $500 million on games that they were not sure were going to be successful. Sony spent $400 million on Concord and then shut it down 2 weeks later, and Ubisoft made Shadows, which really didn't do well, but they still upheld their standard of big releases, of where they spent in the hundreds of millions to make that game. So I don't know why they have been cutting Need for Speed so short. At this point, the only thing they can do is reboot the franchise. They need to reboot Need for Speed. And with that, this is the Chilly Man signing off. I thank everyone for watching. Peace out.